my grandparents was only 18 years old, and he headed west at that time, and he landed in the poorest part of Ohio eventually, and he got married about that time, and he made one trip further north into up into the northern Ohio when the Indians stole his horses. They stole he had two horses, and the Indians came and stole the horses. And he got his gun and followed them, and he followed them for 2 days, and into the second day, these Indians, two Indians that stole his horses, was joined by 11 other Indians. So he just decided it's time for him to turn around and go home. So he came back. That was southern Ohio, where he settled, and that was the poorest part of Ohio. And then the family moved to Illinois during the next generation.
Was that your great-grandfather or your grandfather?
Oh, great-great-great-grandfather.
Your great-great-grandfather.
But it's going way back. And but the next generation went through to my grandfather, was just a little too young for the Civil War, but his brother was old enough to be in the Civil War. And when he got out of the Civil War, he was just like a lot of Civil War veterans. He wanted to head west, so they went west, and he had to leave Illinois because he hunted coyotes with a pack of hounds, and the hunting got rather sparse in Illinois when they fenced it up. They started fencing the farms up there and couldn't hunt coyotes any longer, so he headed for Kansas. And he stayed in Topeka, Kansas area for 15 or 20 years, and they started fencing that up, so then he headed further west. But my grandfather stayed in Emporia. That was his brother that had been in the Civil War, but my grandfather went down to Emporia and got a farm down there. And that's where I went back to after I was, what way I happened to be born in western Kansas was that my grandfather, his brother, Chris McColm, my grandfather's name was Chris, and his brother's name was Jesse McColm. And Jesse was the hunter, and when they fenced up eastern Kansas, he headed west again, and he ended in Colby. And he got out there was a lot of people leaving Colby. He'd accumulated a little money somewhere or other, and he started buying the abandoned cropland. And then when that was when my dad was just about age to start doing something. So my dad got married, and they went out to take care of Uncle Jesse's land in Colby. He'd bought the land that the farmers had abandoned. And the next year, after they got there, the dust storm started because a lot of this abandoned land was blown out.
What year was this?
1910, when it was blown out. And I was born in 11, and they had the sod house built by then. Well, in fact, the sod house was on the property that they moved into, and Dad said as soon as they got the bed bugs out of it, it was a pretty decent place to live. And that was the life that they were living on the prairies out there then. It was a very, very difficult life for anybody, but they didn't know the difference between difficult and not difficult in those days, because everything was difficult. And so I was born there in 1911. They kept a wet towel over my crate because the dust storms really got bad that year. And so my dad decided that they had to put a stop to those dust storms, and he went down to the legislature and got a law passed that allowed the county to buy the abandoned land and plow it so it wouldn't blow away. And 25 years later, when I was a county agent, I came back and here was this dust storms going again, and I dug up the same law that my dad had gotten passed in 1910 and applied it to the we plowed 48,000 acres of land that had been abandoned, and that stopped the dust storms in Kansas in 1935.